What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today for the very last time we're going to be doing a complete hero guide for Battlefront 2, with this one obviously covering BB-8. This is the very last hero guide that I will ever make for Battlefront 2, as obviously I've covered them all over the last year or so, and as great as it is that I've finally done all 22 characters, it is kind of a sad day too. The series that I built my channel on has finally come to an end, and so I just wanted to say a massive thank you to all of you guys for the support with this series, but I'll touch on all of that soppy stuff at the end of the video as a little bit of a send-off, but for now we're just going to get stuck into the video. Now, in these hero guides we're going to be covering everything that could possibly need covering, from base stats, ability stats, the best star cards for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, as well as some of the best maps to choose them on, some general tips for those game modes, the best star cards for Heroes vs Villains and Hero Showdown, which enemy characters you need to look out for, and then lastly covering some general tips for the hero game modes as well. So as you can see, this guide is going to be breaking down every single aspect of the hero. If you're new around here and you end up enjoying this video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more Battlefront 2 content, and be sure to hit that notification bell as well. So getting into BB-8's base stats, and his stats are kind of hard to compare to the other heroes since the droids are obviously so unique, but his base stats are actually quite a bit better than BB-9E in almost every category. Starting off with his base HP, he has 650, which is 50 more than BB-9E has, and is on par with most blaster heroes in the game. And as for how much health he can regenerate at once, he can regen up to 300 HP, which is also up there with some of the better characters in the game in terms of health. So his health overall is genuinely pretty decent, and when you consider his small hitbox, he is actually pretty tanky for his size, because not only does he have solid health stats, but he's also super hard to hit as well. In terms of his damage, his shock prod deals 29 damage per shock, and it deals around 106 damage per second, meaning he can shock around 3.5 times per second, and going by those stats you can take out most regular troopers in under 2 seconds. The rate of fire is 216 shocks per minute, which is the same as BB-9E, and it takes 10 seconds of holding down the trigger for his shock prod to overheat. However, the range on it is obviously not very far at all. Now, moving on to his abilities, and his abilities are actually pretty solid. They're definitely better suited for getting kills compared to BB-9E, and again, the droids also have some passive abilities too, so I'll cover those after the main abilities. His left ability is resistance backing, and this ability scrambles the enemy radar as well as revealing nearby enemies. It also slightly increases the damage dealt to enemies who are revealed. It seems to be only 3% roughly, as his regular damage output is 29 damage, while this one takes it to 30 damage, so it barely makes any difference, but it is still useful either way. The ability will last for 10 seconds all up, and it has an 18-second cooldown, which is about what you would expect. Moving on, we have his middle ability, which is called Cable Spin, and this one is without a doubt his best ability, and honestly it's probably one of the best area of effect abilities in the entire game, which is pretty crazy to think about. This ability essentially causes BB-8 to spin his cables, damaging anyone in the way for an 8-second active time. It deals 45 damage per hit and a total of 133 damage per second if the enemy stays within the area of effect. This one has a 25-second cooldown, which, considering its strength, is definitely where you would expect it to be for balancing. Now, for his right ability we have Rolling Charge, and this one just sends BB-8 rolling forward really quickly, knocking and damaging anyone in its path, and it also breaks the blocks of any lightsabers. It deals 200 damage to troopers, meaning it is a one-hit kill obviously, and then it deals 150 damage to heroes, and it only requires a 10-second cooldown, which is actually really solid because this ability can be a lifesaver in a tight situation. Now, lastly, we also have his passive abilities, and these are essentially just things that he's always doing rather than having to activate them yourself. As is the case with every hero other than Boss, he has a health on kill ability, meaning that if you get a kill on a trooper you get 20 health back or 100 health for hero kills. He then also activates or captures objectives twice as fast as anyone in the game, just like BB-9E, so it'll just take you exactly half the time to arm an objective than normal. Lastly, he also passively increases the cooldown speed of nearby teammates and their abilities, so if you stick near your teammates you'll help them out a ton in being able to use their abilities more often. So that is it for all of his base stats and abilities, and now we're going to move on to some tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, starting off with his best star cards. Keep in mind these cards are just a matter of opinion. There aren't really any loadouts in the game that are objectively the best or anything like that, but these are just what I find to work best in these game modes. The first card I'd recommend is the Self Repairs card, and this one gives you up to an extra 100 HP regeneration, meaning you can regen up to 400 HP with this card equipped, and for me this one is a must have. That is Obi-Wan levels of health regen, and like I said, with your small hitbox that makes you very good at surviving. The second card I'd recommend is the Whirlwind card, and when this one is fully upgraded it'll increase your cable spin damage by 8 as well as increasing the radius by 2 meters, which is arguably even more important as you can hit even more enemies. So this one is a must have in my opinion. The third card I'd recommend is the spinner card, and when this one is fully upgraded, it means that if you hit 2 enemies with cable spin, it will reduce the cooldown by 10 whole seconds, taking it to only a 15-second cooldown, and more often than not, you're going to be hitting 2 enemies with the cable spin anyway. So this one is insane for maximizing that cable spin ability, and combined with the last one, it is a match made in heaven. Now moving on to the best maps to choose him on in Galactic Assault, the 3 maps that I personally think he's the best on are the Death Star, Naboo and Camino. All 3 of these maps were mentioned for BB-9E as well, and they're here for essentially the same reason. These maps are so good for sneaking around people's ankles in those super tight areas like the hallways or the small objective rooms. So you're definitely going to have most of your success on maps like these where you are right up there in the action. Now moving on to some general tips for Galactic Assault and Supremacy, and compared to BB-9E, BB-8 is definitely much easier to get the hang of, and overall I'd actually consider him a pretty solid hero to play in these modes simply because he actually has some crazy damage output combined with a pretty decent health and a really small hitbox. Don't get me wrong, if you find yourself in trouble, then he can struggle to defend himself at times simply because he is kind of just a sitting duck once he's cornered or getting targeted by a saber hero, for example. But if you can get your positioning right and make sure your situational awareness is on point, he is honestly a beastly little character to play as. Like I mentioned a few times already, he's so small and so hard to hit that he can be a real menace to the enemy team on maps like the Death Star, for example, where there's usually groups of enemies sort of bunched up together, because you can often sneak in somewhat easily, deal a bunch of damage with your cable spin and even just your shock prod, and since he's such a hard target to hit, the enemies will often have a hard time killing you even once they have noticed that you're there. It often ends in chaos with like 5 or 6 enemies just kind of shooting at each other's feet while trying to take you out, and if you stay nimble enough and constantly move, roll and attack, you can be an absolute menace at the worst of times. Like I said, map awareness and positioning are key for this kind of thing. It really helps to know where the enemies are generally going to bunch up and how you can flank to avoid them, or how you can get in and out without any real damage. So honestly, a lot of BB-8's playstyle just comes down to a lot of map knowledge and awareness, which can really only come through plenty of practice and playtime. As long as you're always staying with teammates and just sort of trying to be a little bit sneaky rather than rolling head first at enemies like you're invincible, he is honestly pretty easy to do well with. He can take a bit of practice initially just to get the hang of, but like I said, if you've got plenty of playtime and focus on the right areas of each map, you can definitely do very well with him in GA and Supremacy. To summarize, you essentially just need to play BB-8 in a sort of sneaky in and out fashion, getting into a few clusters of enemies, taking some out, and then essentially bobbing and weaving to get out of danger. And if you're sticking with your teammates as well as helping play those objectives, then you'll be dominating in no time with BB-8. So now moving on to the hero versus villain game modes, and while he can be a little bit tough at times in these modes, he is much easier than BB-9E is, and with a bit of practice he can become a very formidable character despite his stature. Starting off with his star cards, and just like BB-9E, he's actually one of the few characters in the game that I actually use the same cards for these modes as I do in GA and Supremacy, so I won't bother explaining those ones again, but yeah, the same cards that I mentioned earlier are the ones that I use in these modes too. If you're not a fan of one of those cards, then the spared batteries card is also really decent. It gives you 1 extra damage for every 3 trooper kills or 300 damage dealt to villains, to a maximum of 7 extra damage, which takes it to 36 damage per hit, and obviously that can help a lot once you start to get on a run. Now I also normally cover heroes that you need to look out for, but just like I said for BB-9E, I actually think you almost just need to look out for everyone. The droids are definitely very hard characters to play, especially in these modes. And so you kind of just need to be very wary of each character, since essentially anyone can melt you if you're not careful, but with that being said, you can also melt them right back if you play it right. Now moving on to just some regular tips for the hero game modes, and like I've mentioned for a few characters in the past, BB-8 really does have an almost identical playstyle in these modes as he does in GA and Supremacy. He's the type of character that needs to be a little bit sneakier and I guess more strategic in the way that you move around the map and engage in battles with the enemy team. Like I said earlier, you can't really just send it head first at a 1v1 and expect to win if the enemy knows what they're doing, so it's mostly about how you engage in the battles. Sticking with teammates to create 2v2s or 3v3s is a great way to play, as generally the droids are kind of forgotten about if an enemy has to deal with, say, a Luke and a Han as well, and that leaves you to make the most of the cable spin to deal a ton of damage, and therefore your teammates will also do better as well in that situation. You also want to make the most of the rolling charge to break blocks or to knock enemies down. Even though it deals really decent damage, it is honestly better as a defensive ability more than anything, so I sort of tend to try and save it for either a get out of jail moment, or if an enemy is like super low on health and I just need to quickly take them out. At the end of the day though, he really is a relatively simple character to play as. That doesn't mean that he's easy by any means, but his playstyle pretty much speaks for itself. To summarize, once again, you should try and play the team support type of role, sticking with your teammates to create 2v2s or 3v3s, and then making the most of those situations to sort of just deal as much damage as you can by combining all of your abilities and some quick movement to throw off the enemies. That is going to do it for this one though, guys. As I said, this is actually the very last hero guide that I'll be making for Battlefront 2, and I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you guys for the support over the last 2 or 3 years. It's been an awesome journey getting through all of these really in-depth guides, and I could not have done it without all of the support from you guys. Now, I will still be making Battlefront 2 content for the foreseeable future, guys, so don't stress. The top 5 plays, mod reviews, and killstreak breakdowns will still be coming each and every week, and then with Star Wars Hunters on the horizon, I'll likely just sort of replace these hero guides with some Hunters videos as well, just to change it up, and hopefully you guys enjoy the content moving forward, both on this channel and on my second channel, which is a Battlefield channel for any of you guys that are interested in checking that one out too. As always, a massive thank you to my channel members and my patrons for the continued support. If you guys are interested in supporting the channel as well, then be sure to check out the Patreon page that is linked down in the description. If you enjoyed the video and it did help you guys out, then be sure to leave a like down below to support the channel, and be sure to subscribe with those notifications on so that you don't miss out on any more Star Wars Battlefront 2 content. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Crush them! Make them suffer!